She laughed at me. Right there, in front of everyone, her friends, her coworkers, the entire lobby of her father's building. She looked me up and down, let out a slow, cruel little laugh, and said, "Did someone leave a door open? There's a lost dog in the foyer." I stood there in my clean but simple clothes, holding a folder of documents I'd driven 4 hours to deliver, and I didn't say a word. I just let her laugh. Because I had learned a long time ago that people who mock what they don't understand are always the ones who end up paying for it. Her name was Celeste Hargrove, and she was, by every visible measure, the kind of woman who made other people feel small for sport. I grew up in a small town called Millfield, the kind of place where people still wave at strangers and leave their doors unlocked at night. My name is Eli. My father was a carpenter. My mother taught elementary school. We weren't poor in spirit, but we were poor in the ways that matter to people like Celeste. No penthouse, no private education, no name that meant anything in the circles she moved through. When I drove into the city that morning with a trunk full of legal documents and a referral from a regional property attorney, I had no idea that the woman waiting at the top of that glass and marble elevator shaft was going to be the most expensive lesson in human dignity I'd ever witness. Not mine, hers. I had been hired by an estate attorney to personally courier a sealed set of land documents to Hargrove Capital Group. The senior partner couldn't make the trip. Himself, he was recovering from surgery, and I was his most trusted associate. I'd passed the bar 2 years prior, worked 60-hour weeks, and earned every responsibility he'd ever given me. None of that was written on my face when I walked through those doors. What they saw was a young man in a gray jacket that hadn't been pressed that morning, carrying a worn leather satchel, with dirt from a gas station parking lot still on the toe of one boot. Celeste Hargrove, 27 years old, only daughter of real estate magnate Gerald Hargrove, saw a delivery boy who had wandered too far from the freight entrance. "Deliveries go around back," she said, not looking up from her phone. Her friends giggled. One of them whispered something. Another one took a sip of coffee and smirked over the rim. I told her I was there to see her father's legal team. She finally looked up. That look, the slow, evaluating kind, the kind that strips you down to your financial worth and finds you wanting. I'd seen it before, but never quite so openly performed for an audience. "Legal team," she repeated, in that tone people use when they're pretending to be confused but are really just being contemptuous. "Right, of course. And you are?" I told her my name and my firm. She smiled at her friends. Should we call security or just point him toward the service elevator? I stood there for exactly 4 seconds. Then I reached into my satchel, withdrew the sealed documents, held them up so she could read the name printed on the outside, and said, calmly, "These contain a time-sensitive land transfer worth $11 million. I'll wait in the lobby while you let your father know I'm here." Then I turned, sat down in one of the chairs near the window, and opened a book I had in my bag. She didn't call security. She went upstairs. And about 9 minutes later, a flustered assistant came down, apologized excessively, and walked me up to the 14th floor where Gerald Hargrove, a tired, serious man who had clearly built everything he had from nothing, stood up from his desk and shook my hand with both of his. I never said a word to Celeste about what happened in that lobby. I didn't need to. But Gerald Hargrove apparently did. I found out later, through the attorney's office, that her father had a long conversation with her that evening. Not because he was angry on my behalf, but because he had recognized the name of my firm and understood, in a way she hadn't, exactly who had just been standing in his lobby being mocked by his daughter. What I didn't know, what none of us knew yet, was that this was only the beginning. 3 weeks later, I got a call that Gerald Hargrove wanted to retain our firm for an extended land acquisition project. It was a significant contract. My boss, still recovering, asked me to handle the client relationship personally, which meant regular visits to Hargrove Capital, which meant regular contact with Celeste, who sat on the board and co-managed the acquisition portfolio with her father. The first meeting was tense in a way only I seemed to feel. She walked in, looked at me, and if she recognized the discomfort of what had happened in the lobby, she buried it fast and deep. Professional mask, polished tone, controlled distance. She called me Mr. Carter throughout the meeting and made sure everything she said was addressed to the room rather than to me directly. I was fine with that. I was there to do a job. But over the next several weeks, something started to shift. I don't know when it started exactly. Maybe it was the afternoon she came into the conference room early and found me going over documents at the table with my jacket off, coffee going cold beside me, completely absorbed in a contract dispute I was trying to untangle. She stood there for a moment before she realized I hadn't heard her come in. When I looked up, she didn't look contemptuous. She looked, I don't have a better word for it, curious. Or maybe it was the Thursday Gerald had to step out for a medical appointment and Celeste had to sit in on our session alone. She was sharp. Sharper than I'd expected, which, I'll be honest, says something about my own assumptions too. She caught an inconsistency in a zoning clause that I had flagged internally but hadn't yet raised. When she said it out loud, I looked at her differently than I had before. She caught me looking. We didn't talk about it. But after that, the meetings were different, less formal. She started asking questions that weren't strictly necessary for the work, about my background, about where I'd studied, about the town I was from. I answered plainly. I didn't dress anything up. Millfield was Millfield. My father was a carpenter. My mother taught school. I had gone to a state university on a partial scholarship and worked every summer to pay the rest. I watched her face while I told her these things. She wasn't mocking anymore. She was listening. And underneath the listening was something I hadn't expected to find there. Something that looked a lot like shame. One evening in late October, we were both still in the building after everyone else had gone. The lights in the conference room had dimmed to their after-hours setting. She was across the table from me, and neither of us was looking at documents anymore. We were just talking about her father's health, which was worse than the public knew, about the pressure she'd been under since taking on more of the business, about the gap between who she was at work and who she was when she let herself be still. She said quietly, "You know, the day you came in with those documents." "I know," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "I was awful. You were performing for an audience," I said. "People do that. That's too generous." "Maybe, but it's honest." She looked at me for a long time without saying anything. And I felt something that I should not have let myself feel. Something that sits in your chest and makes the air feel different. I want to tell you I was smart enough to leave it alone. I want to tell you I kept my professional distance and my clear head. But the truth is, I didn't. Not that night anyway. We didn't say anything more about it. But when she said good night at the elevator, she held my gaze for just a second longer than she needed to. And I stood in the lobby of that building for a long time after she was gone, looking at nothing in particular. That was the week everything started falling apart. I found out through the firm that Celeste was engaged. Not publicly announced yet, but arranged. A quiet agreement between her father and the family of a man named Bradley Whitmore, whose own real estate empire was positioned to merge strategically with Hargrove Capital. Bradley was everything I was not. Old money, Yale educated. The kind of man who wore his confidence like a second skin, and treated everyone below a certain income bracket like pleasant, temporary furniture. He started coming to the meetings, sitting beside Celeste, resting his hand on the back of her chair in the particular way powerful men announce ownership without saying a word. He didn't like me. I could see it the first day, the appraising look, the way he inserted himself into conversations I was having with Celeste, the way he asked questions about my background in that tone designed to make the answering feel like a small humiliation. I answered everything the same way I always did. Plain and direct. Millfield, carpenter father. State University, bar exam. Here, Bradley laughed at one of my answers. A short, dry laugh that wasn't really about being amused. "Charming," he said. Celeste didn't laugh with him. I noticed that. 2 days later, something happened that I still don't fully understand how to explain. I was early to the building and overheard Bradley in the hallway. On a phone call he clearly thought was private, talking about the land acquisition deal. The specific parcel we were negotiating. And the number he mentioned to whoever was on the other end of that call was not the number that had been discussed in our meetings. It was significantly lower. He was redirecting proceeds, moving money in a way that would have quietly defrauded Gerald Hargrove's estate. I stood very still. I thought about what I was hearing and what it would mean, and then I did what I had been trained to do. I went back to my office, wrote a confidential memo to my senior partner, and attached everything I'd been able to document. From the paper trail I had already been reviewing as part of the acquisition work, I didn't tell Celeste. I didn't confront Bradley. I just passed the information where it needed to go and let the people with authority handle it. What I did not anticipate was how quickly it would unravel, or what Celeste would do when it did. The investigation moved fast. Within 6 days, Bradley Whitmore was removed from the project. Within 10, the engagement was off. Gerald Hargrove, from what I understood, had been devastated, not by the financial fraud, which was caught before real damage was done, but by the betrayal of someone his daughter had been prepared to marry. Celeste knew it was me who had found it. She showed up at my office on a Tuesday morning, and she was not the version of herself that performed for audiences. She was quiet, and she was shaken, and she looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her face before, raw and uncertain and grateful in a way she clearly didn't know how to hold. She said she wanted to say thank you. I told her it was my job. She said it wasn't just the document work, and we both knew it. She was right. We did both know it. And then she said something that cracked something open in me. She said, "I don't know why you didn't just let it be. After how I treated you, I didn't answer right away." I thought about Millfield, about my father, who once drove 30 miles in a snowstorm to return a wallet he'd found in a parking lot, with all the cash still in it, to a man he'd never met. About what my mother used to say, that how you treat people when nothing is watching is the only character that counts. I said, because it was the right thing to do. That's all. She looked at me for a long time. And then, very quietly, she said my name, just my name. The way you say something when you're finally seeing it clearly. I went home that night and I made a decision. I handed off the Hargrove account to a colleague the following week. I told my boss I needed a change of pace and that I was ready to take the regional office position I'd been offered in the fall. I packed what I needed from my desk. I drove back to Millfield, walked through the old house, and I let myself breathe again. I didn't tell anyone at Hargrove Capital where I was going. I left no forwarding address through the firm for personal correspondence. I just disappeared, quietly, without drama, because I had learned something in that building that I hadn't known how to name until I was driving back through the long flat roads toward home. Whatever was growing between Celeste and me, it was real, and it was dangerous. And the last thing either of us needed was for me to become the rebound from a broken engagement, the charity case she felt guilty about, the village boy she owed a debt to. If it was ever going to be anything, it had to begin differently than that. I needed her to come looking, not because I wanted to test her, but because I needed to know she was choosing something real. What I didn't fully understand was what it was going to cost her to find me. She called the firm. They gave her nothing. She talked to colleagues who knew me only professionally. She drove to the address on file with the Bar Association, an old apartment I hadn't lived in for over a year. She called my former law school. She left a message with my professor, a man I had studied under who knew me well. He didn't tell her where I was, but he called me. "There's a young woman looking for you," he said. Hargrove. She sounds like she means it. I sat with that for a long time. I thought about the lobby, about the laugh, about the folder of documents in my hand and the look on her face. I thought about the conference room in October, the lights dimmed, the city going quiet outside the windows. I thought about the way she had said my name on that Tuesday morning, like she was hearing it for the first time. 6 weeks after I left, I drove back into the city on a cold Thursday in December. I didn't call ahead. I walked into the lobby of Hargrove Capital, and the woman at the front desk recognized me and picked up her phone before I had taken 3 steps. Celeste came down in the elevator. She was wearing a dark coat and her hair was down. And when the doors opened and she saw me standing there, she stopped. Just stopped, like something in her engine cut off. I said, "I heard you were looking for me." She crossed the lobby in about 4 steps, and I will not pretend I was unmoved by the fact that she was crying before she reached me, not dramatically, not loudly, just quietly, the way people cry when they've been holding something for too long. She said, "I didn't know how to say any of this the right way." "Then don't say it the right way," I told her. "Just say it." She stood there in front of me in that same lobby where she had once called me a lost dog. And she said, "I looked for you because I couldn't stop thinking about who you are. Not what you have, not where you're from, who you are. And I needed you to know that I see it. I see it now." I looked at her for a long moment. And then I said, "That's a good place to start. We didn't fix everything in that lobby. Real things don't fix in a moment. But we started, honestly, without pretense, without performance, without the armor she had spent years building around herself to stay safe in a world that treated wealth like proof of worth. We started from the ground up, the way things built to last always do." Her father approved, if you're wondering. He shook my hand again, this time for different reasons. He told me, quietly, that the man who does the right thing when no one is watching is the only man worth trusting with the things that matter. I told him that's more or less what my father used to say too. He looked at me and nodded like we had just agreed on something important. I went back to Millfield that Christmas with Celeste beside me. She sat at my parents' table in a house that had no foyer, no marble, no staff. She helped my mother with the dishes. She sat on the porch with my father and listened to him talk about the grain of different kinds of wood. And she asked real questions, the way a person asks when they are genuinely curious about another life. I watched her from the window and I thought, there she is, not the woman from the lobby. This one. The one underneath all that performance. This is who she actually is. Sometimes it takes losing something, or the threat of losing it, to finally see what you've been looking at all along. And sometimes the boy you dismissed at the door is the one who ends up holding it open for you, on the other side of everything, waiting with more patience than you ever deserved. But that's the thing about dignity. It doesn't require an audience. It just keeps showing up, quiet, steady, waiting for you to catch up. If this story moved you, I want to ask you something. Have you ever misjudged someone based on what you could see, only to find out later that you had it completely backwards? Drop it in the comments. I want to hear it. And if you love stories about hidden worth, class difference, and the kind of love that makes you want to be better, share this one with someone who needs to hear it today. They'll thank you for it.